Welcome to the Sunday Gardener. It's April, in fact it's Easter Monday in April, and in this video we're going to look at what you can do in your garden in April. This April, however, is like no other April we've known because we, in common with so many countries around the world, are struck by the coronavirus. And we're having to take care not to go out, to keep our social distancing, to keep safe so that our NHS and key workers are safe. One of the places that you're safe in is your own garden, if you're lucky enough to have one, or on a balcony where you can also garden some of the things that we'll be looking at today. I'm going to start with bedding plants because bedding plants is always a topic in April, even though this year the garden centres are closed, so it's relatively more difficult to get a hold of bedding plants, but a lot of retailers are online, are selling them. So most bedding plants are tender, and the question I often get asked is, when can I plant out my bedding plants? And the answer is not yet. Although the country varies, there's about 6 weeks difference in the coming of spring, and there's a significant difference in temperature between Scotland and Cornwall. So any advice is tempered where you are. Most places will still get cold weather and a frost in April. Indeed, having had a glorious Easter, we're now talking about temperatures and ground frosts. Bedding plants tender, coming from places like South Africa, originating from places like South Africa, they do not like cold. They will not tolerate frost, and you shouldn't plant them out during a cold period because, if you can imagine, they've been grown in a perfect environment, nice and warm, exact amount of required rainfall, and then we put them out in an English spring and it shocks them. And quite often you'll look at the bedding plants and think, oh, they're not growing, why aren't they growing? And it's because they've gone out in a cold spell. If you're buying bedding plants now, or they arrive in a cold spell, keep them under glass, keep them in a greenhouse, conservatory, indoors, in a spare bedroom, anywhere, but don't put them outside till the risk of frost is gone. So there are exceptions, and these sweet peas are one such exception. Sweet peas are half-hardy annuals. These were seeded earlier on in the month in the greenhouse, and as you can see they've grown very well and shortly be planting them out. But I do want to demonstrate one thing about sweet peas. Now, sweet peas are one of our favourite summer annuals, and they are beautiful, and I grow them every year even though they are quite faff. To get the maximum amount of flowers from your plant at this stage where they've got a bit of leggy growth, it's really important that you pinch out or cut out the top growth. So if you see here, that's the growth point. I'm going to take it back on each and every one of them. What this does, and these two at the end I've done earlier, hopefully you can see these on camera, but what I've done, where that's been done earlier, you can see it's thrown out 2 more shoots, as has this one. This was cut back earlier as well. So when you take out the growing point, what you do is you make the plant throw out a shoot so that you get more stems from the single plant, and that ultimately will mean more flowers in the summer. So it might seem a bit drastic and you think, oh, I'm cutting off all the growing points. It will be all right. Trust me, I've done this dozens of times before, and they will grow all the better for it, and you will have a lot more sweet peas in the summer, which obviously will be beautiful. Next thing I want to take a look at is pruning, because in the spring, particularly when we get nice sunny days, there's a real temptation to look at the garden and think, I'll go out there, tidy it up, prune everything, get everywhere cleared up, which could lead to a very tidy garden but not a lot of flowers, because the important thing is to know what you're pruning. It's vital that shrubs which are going to flower in the spring are not pruned now. So anything that you're expecting to flower before June, do not prune. These are shrubs which flower on what's called old wood, which basically means the branches which are already there, and on those branches are embryo buds. So if you prune now, you will prune out the flowers. So things like Sparrea, Philadelphus, a lot of the common lovely spring flowering shrubs, leave them alone for now. If you're not sure, wait until it flowers and then make a decision. And everything that flowers early in the spring, you prune after flowering. Summer flowering shrubs such as buddleia and hydrangea, you can prune now, you can cut back corners, because they have several months to come into flower and to develop. But the spring flowering shrubs, leave them alone, don't prune them till after they've flowered. The other thing to be doing in the garden and the greenhouse this time of year is seeding. This year with so many people at home because of the coronavirus, gardening is a source of solace for people. Growing seeds, particularly vegetables, very time consuming, gives us something to do during these days at home. It's important for new gardeners to be able to distinguish between what they should seed and when. And that's the same really in some ways as bedding plants, because some vegetables are hardy and some vegetables are tender. And if you go on the website and look at what to do in April in the garden, there's quite a lot of information there about what you can sow outside now because it's hardy, such as broad beans. These are broad beans that are ready for planting out. These were in fact germinated in the greenhouse, but I've just sown some directly into the soil as well. Remember, everything you sow together will flower and fruit together. So to avoid a glut, successional sowing or planting, and fortnightly is a good way to do it because it's kind of easy to remember. I sowed last weekend, so I don't sow this weekend, I sow the next week. So some vegetables are hardy, so you can have onions out. I'm just looking at my vegetable plot, remembering what I've got out there. Onions, garlic, parsley, lettuces are surprisingly hardy. Obviously if there's a frost, I'll probably throw something over them to protect them. They're hardy, they will take the cold, but there's no reason to expose them to really low temperatures if we get a proper frost. But they're happy and will continue growing in the garden, even though some days are quite chilly. Then there is a whole selection of vegetables which are tender, and into this category we put tomatoes, squashes, cucumbers, courgettes, runner beans, French beans. All need to go out only when the risk of frost has passed. Now you can germinate them earlier in the greenhouse and conservatory or on a windowsill. I'm just going to show you, if you're new to gardening and you don't have either the time, money or resource, or because the garden centres are closed, ability to buy propagators, you can make a small homemade propagator. Now this is ideal if you're just sowing 1 or 2 seeds. Perhaps you're saying, these happen to be an annual, by way of an illustration, because I've sown most of my seeds, but if you were sowing, say, courgettes or cucumbers, you might not want to sow a whole tray through because they produce so many. So it's usual to sow about 3. So when you filled your pot with compost, just press it down gently, because with all seeds you don't want air pockets. If the roots of a new very small plant grow into an area with an air pocket and there's no water, there's no food, real risk that the seedling will die. So just tap it down gently, and then we take the seed. The actual seeding isn't that important, but we'll pop it in and we will water it. But I'm just going to show you how to make this propagator, because it's really handy if you're going to sow tender seeds such as squashes, courgettes, cucumbers, to get them going, because what you do, use a polythene bag, and this bag actually fits very snugly over the top. What it does is it produces a really tight seal that enables it to warm up inside. It seals in the moisture and it makes a perfect little propagator until the seedlings emerge. If the bag's in danger of collapsing, put a piece of bamboo or something in to keep it upright, but when it's as tight as this, it normally stays in position quite well. If you can't get the right size bag to pot, use an elastic band to create a seal, and that will produce an ideal germination environment for 2 or 3 plants. And just to mention, like little seedlings such as these, which are parsley. You can see how small they are. They're really fragile when they're like this, and this is why growing things from seed produces activity, keeps everyone busy, and it's one of the things that we need over these coming weeks of lockdown. The seed has only got a tiny root, and if they dry out these seeds will die. So they need to be checked every day to make sure that there's sufficient moisture, that they've not dried out, because the seedling is only in the top 1/8 of an inch of soil, and that's the very part of the soil that will dry out. And that's why it's really important to check seedlings and check plants every day to make sure that they're disease-free, how they're getting on, and that they're properly watered. And then as soon as they produce what's called their real leaves, and I don't think I've got anything to hand, but these will produce a parsley shaped leaf, and when they produce those real leaves, that's the time to prick them out, which will involve taking out each little seedling, take it out by its leaves, not its stem, and planting it in another little pot to grow on for a few weeks till it becomes sturdy enough to plant outside. Another activity that a lot of people are interested in is growing strawberries, because they're one of our nation's favourite fruits. And you can do this even if you don't have a garden, if you just have a balcony or a very small area. I've put these in a hanging basket. I usually grow them in the vegetable plot, but I'm very short of space this year. So I decided to uproot some plants out of the vegetable plot and put them in a hanging basket. And as you can see, I've inserted them in the various gaps around the hanging basket, and I've also lined it with moss to stop the soil coming out, and filled it with really good quality compost. And there's I've planted around all the planting holes, and there's about 5 plants in the top. This too will need to be kept well watered, because one of the downsides of growing in containers is that they do dry out more quickly. But hopefully in a few weeks this will come into flower and then into fruit. And the important thing to remember, apart from regular watering, is there's only one thing about strawberries, is that they are loved by the birds. And if this hanging basket goes outside, and undecided whether to leave it in the greenhouse or take it outside, depends on its pollination, it will need netting, because the birds will come down and eat it. And it's a bit of a shame to have all those lovely red strawberries to find them all gone the next day, because the birds have been feasting on them. There's berries out there for the birds without having our strawberries. So making a strawberry hanging basket is ideal. This basket may look a little bit unattractive because it's plastic and not very fancy, but actually it's a really good hanging basket because it's got a water reservoir in the bottom, and for something like strawberries where you want to make sure that they get enough water and you're not watering it all the time, this type of basket works very well. Other things you can be doing in the garden at this time of year: trim back lavender so into a neat shape, not cutting into the old wood, just trimming off the spent flowers. It's also a good time to stake perennials. Buy this in plants like peony that have lovely big flower heads, but they do have a tendency and can snap if not supported. So you get supports in around then. Begin to get supports in place for other perennials. Alliums, if you have a garden that's exposed, because they're tall stems, can be subject to snapping later on. Once delphiniums get underway, they need to be staked. A lot of perennials need support. Not only that, but it also stops them overlaying on the plant next to them. Things like crocosmia will often start off very upright and then will flop right over. So at this time of year it looks like it's going to be all right, but actually it needs staking so that as it grows it doesn't flatten everything around it. I've just finished the rather lengthy job of weeding the borders, and I've done that because I want to put a mulch over the borders, and this will help to keep in moisture, and it helps to suppress the weeds. And if the weeds do seed, they tend to seed in the top of the mulch, and they're very easy to get out. Personally, I use Strulch. I don't get paid for saying that. It's just a really good form of mulch, and it's quite lightweight and it's easy to handle in the garden. So getting the borders weed free and then mulching them will mean that you don't have to weed them all through the summer. And the other thing that you can do, and traditionally do in April, is plant early potatoes. This is potato planting time, growing them in containers or in the ground, but the main thing to remember is that the top of the potatoes are not frost hardy. So if they do come up before end of May, you will need to keep an eye on them, and if there is a frost you'll need to put a cover over them to make sure they don't get frosted. That's all explained in another video about planting potatoes, but April is an absolute ideal time to get early potatoes in the ground or in containers. And the other thing to remember is to enjoy your garden. take solace from it, find some peace and quiet in this really difficult time that we're all going through. Gardening is very good for physical and mental well-being, and we all need to look after ourselves at this time.